What's up, y'all? You're now listening to the What Now podcast. I'm Dr. Spencer Dupre, owner of Empower Chiropractic.
And I am Dr. Zach Thompson, owner of Within Chiropractic. The purpose of this podcast is to document and share the experiences of two young business owners as we open our own brick and mortar chiropractic practices. Join along as we discuss all of our wins, our losses, insights, and the many, many lessons we learned.
As a disclaimer, none of this is ever intended to be medical, legal, or financial advice. Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the What Now podcast. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Spencer Dupre with Empower Chiropractic, and I got my boy, Zach Thompson within Chiropractic in Colleyville.
What's up?
And we have an awesome guest. So, Zach, tell us who we have on our show today.
Yeah, so we are super blessed to have on Dr. Dan Sullivan, who's a chiropractor, speaker, author, and one of the most sought-after health experts in the United States. He's well known for showing chiropractors the profound science and proof behind what they do and to give them certainty in communicating to the public. Dr. Dan began investing himself into the world of chiropractic in 2004. His mission began with building one of the largest single-doctor natural health care clinics in the state of Nebraska. Dr. Dan expanded his pursuit to the world of research and education in 2012, speaking to students, doctors, and the public while serving as an official chiropractor for the United States wrestling team during the 2012 London Olympics. He currently lives with his wife and daughters in the great state of Atlanta, Georgia, where he passionately continues to research and speak on the scientific validation of the principle of chiropractic. And Dr. Dan, we are super, super excited to dive into all that we, are going to dive into here today. So thank you for coming on and spending about an hour of your time. I know you're a busy guy, so really appreciate you making time for us.
Yeah, it's an honor to be, guys. I will say, you probably got that from a website, which I'm gonna have to text my website guy. I'm like, everything was accurate except for where I reside. I'm at that. Atlanta was 2 cities ago. So I was in Atlanta and then I was in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now I'm in Nashville, Tennessee for the last 3 years. So I got to update the website bio.
I was reading that and I've been following you for quite a bit. And when I was reading it the first time, just to double check I had everything, and I saw Atlanta, I'm like, I'm pretty sure a lot of his Instagram posts are him in Nashville, but this is what the website says. So.
Yeah, we're land of the free here, man. Land of the free in Nashville. Yeah, it's good to be here with you guys. And shoot away. I'm excited to pour into some young, old, middle-aged, everything. Chiros, let's do this.
Let's do it. Well, I'll kick us off. And we were talking before we started recording that I had first heard of you on the Focus stage in 2019. I was a first-year student, and you were preaching, I hope you don't mind me saying that word, but preaching on the neurology of the subluxation. And so really quick, like what made you become so certain and dive so deep into the neurology of the subluxation and what we do as chiropractors?
Well, here's the thing for me, and I know I'm speaking to a lot of you listeners out there. I did it for me. So I grew up in a family, I was fifth of 8 kids, shy, introverted. And I needed certainty to know that what I was doing was truthful. So the deeper I went, and I remember this in chiropractic college, like I became the outcast of my class and really my school real quickly because I just asked so many deep questions and then started following people around. And I needed to know that my 2 oldest brothers are medical doctors. My mom's was a nurse. Well, she was a nurse for 37 years. My sister's an occupational therapist. So I grew up in this world where, hey, I got to prove it. So I carried this weight on my shoulder. And then being in practice, and then an incident happened to me, and I'll keep this really short, but I went and spoke at a school. I won't name names, but it was in the Kansas City area. And I ended up getting a debate with a professor that came up afterwards because I share a bunch of testimonies. I was talking about practice success and getting these, students fired up. And he came up and challenged me on the neurology and or the research behind proof of how these testimonies were happening. I'm talking, just things that chiropractors see, fertility and diabetes and, depression and all these, as you guys know. And so I did enough to fend him off for the moment, but I walked away thinking I did not do it my level of expertise to be able to just, get back in his face and not to prove him wrong. But I knew that he was having a big impact on these students, and they were going to come out thinking that chiropractic was just bad backs and bad necks. And so I'm thinking to myself, I need to go figure this out so I can go bold about it. And that's where it all started. Then I end up following around Dan Murphy for about 2.5 years, saw Chestnut multiple times, so that's really what drew it. I knew the results and I had practice success. I could see it over and over. But then I really went, and then I went and got my philosophy diploma because I wanted to make sure, hey, I got the science on one end, but I'm a philosophy guy at heart. And then I did the thesis on the disaffirmation model. So I'm just one of those guys, like I just, no stone unturned. That's where it, started for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So how do you, with your philosophy diplomat, what did you uncover in your studies for that? And how did it support the science and the clinical certainty part of the neurology?
Well, I mean, first off, chiropractic stands on 3 stools, right? A philosophy, science, and an art. So, the application of the adjustment is, it's as a result of the science of what happens. And that's as a result of the philosophy as to why we'd even do it. So it all just seeps together. I just truthfully, honestly, the real reason is I knew I was going after the science. I'm like, hey, I'm going to go. I wasn't satisfied with our profession's understanding and or communication. Talking about hard bones on soft nerves, it's not that it doesn't happen. It's just not the predominant reason why we get so good results. So therefore, and why everybody needs it, the necessity of care. So I need to understand that so that I could better in my, call it a lack of certainty that drove my certainty and need to understand it. So then when I knew I was going to go out on the science limb, because that's just who I was at the time, then, but I was a philosophy at heart. I knew the philosophy guys that could be like, oh, you're just a science head. I can't listen to you. I'm like, oh, hold on a second. I'm actually a philosophy guy. I'm a Reggie Gold, Fred Barge loving, Joe
Nice.
Strauss, Sisyphus guy. But I'm not gonna take a back seat to the guys that think that I'm just a philosophy guy and we're unscientific. So that's where I wanted to blend it all. And ultimately, when you go down that rabbit hole long enough and deep enough, you realize it's all based on a level of truth that we want the world to know.
So are you saying that you can both know the science and neurology of chiropractic and also still appreciate and understand and claim that the philosophy of the greats of chiropractic are true?
Yeah, I mean, to some, yes, obviously, but there's just a depth to our philosophy. It wasn't made up in a day or a week or a month, and then the science that backs it up. And I'll be the first to admit, science will never answer all the questions. I mean, the universe is still expanding. I mean, some of the scientific principles that we would say is, never going to change, but they're still changing. So things we will eventually find out. And I think BJ said that best, 100 years from now, we're going to be talking about things that, we've been talking about, but science will catch up. And who knows, science will never catch up, but experiential and understanding this human biology is so critical to having certainty. And then where you guys are doing is then how do you put this in practice? The end of the day, putting it in practice and getting results for real humans is where the magic is.
And that was going to be my very next question is how do you go from having all this knowledge, having all this certainty and understanding of neurology and subluxation? How then do you go to the quote unquote layperson or the mom that walks into your practice? And how do you, first off, do your best to not word vomit everything? But then 2, how do you break it down for them? If you could take us through that communication process for us.
Yeah, well, first is having a depth, having a depth, being willing to know and ask yourself the tough questions. I remember, so in school, I asked myself the tough questions. I would get in debate with not just professors, but a lot of students, and not because I wanted to debate, just because, it ended up coming up where I wasn't going to put my knee in somebody's back and call it a chiropractic technique, just things that were taught in my school. So I was very strong technique guy. Clearly, I'm not gonna, if I understand and honor the nervous system, I'm not just gonna randomly put inputs into it. So I studied that, and I went to seminars every month somewhere. I was a gondroid at the beginning and took over the Gonstead. I was president of the Gonstead Club, at second trimester or something like that. And so, your question how do you get a mom to understand it? Well, first you have to understand it. Then knowing that 93% of communication is nonverbal, they're picking up on your tone, your body language. Thirdly, then is the best is that you have stories. Facts tell, stories sell, and you have a very specific process and strategy to deploy that allows you to take somebody in that doesn't, that maybe even skeptical, let alone doesn't know anything about chiropractic. And then next thing you know, they're paying you $2,000-$3,000 for a care plan to correct their problem and change their life for the better. And the greatest asset that they have is their health, right? See how that rolls off like, this isn't my first rodeo. I think about this over and over and over again. Like I'm not asking for people for money because I think that it's the greatest investment. It's the greatest investment they will make. It's the greatest investment. You name it, right? They always say is you have 1,000 wishes and dreams until you're sick and then you have one. So when you start to really dive deep, you're like, how could I ask for that money? I'm like, how could you not? Why would I do that care? How would you not? Why would I do insurance? Why would you you have to ask yourself the deep questions and then you come up with a conclusion and then you ride that, and so, yeah, you have to put in the hard work, and the hard work is sometimes just really understanding why you do what you do, why you say what you say. And so for me, I came out, got good mentorship, asked myself all these deep questions, got very skilled at what I do. And we were just talking before we started this push record, but I went to you ask how to get to 300 a week. I went to 300 a week at the end of my first year, 12 months. I was at 300 a week. And I did it because I had mentorship, I had training, and I had an expectation that that's what's going to happen. Like that's the first one. If you hear nothing else on this line, on this podcast, I'm telling you, you will get what you expect. And this is neurological. We're going to talk about what's more neurological and what's more evidence-based than even the influence of adjustment is the influence of your expectations on your current results. That is as you can take it to the bank. So what I'm going to suggest is, I know you're already probably getting into questions you guys want to ask, but you got to get around a pocket of people. If you have dreams and big visions, you better get around somebody you can model that's having those, that's thinking bigger than you. And I did that. And our thing was go to 1,000 a week. And so I got around the people that want to go 1,000 a week. I didn't even know it existed, but I'm like, October 2004, I walked into this hotel and I had studied everybody. I had looked at everybody and all the coaching, all the mentorship, all the management groups. I was like, nothing. It was just some were good, but they weren't great. And then I finally go to this book, and I'm like, these guys are saying everything I want to say, and they are strong, and they're faith based, and what they do is it aligns with my values and the care plans and the corrective model and how I want to educate. And so I got around them, and then they taught me how to do it. They created a new expectation. So how did they take a shy, introverted middle child who needs to prove it, and within a year go to 300, 2 years to 500, 4 years go to 1,000 a week? They changed my neurology, and I wanted to let everybody know that your brain is neuroplastic. You can change your neurology. That's not a mystery. It is absolute fact. So sorry to jump ahead there, but that was
no, that's great. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about why? So I just watched your recent video. It's the most powerful thing you're talking about, and is your why, right? The biggest thing that converts sales, quote, or brings value to you. You're talking about is your why, why it's so big. Can you expand kind of a little bit about why your passion is the most important part of your entire business?
Yeah. So John DeMartini, who's a chiropractor, if those of you know, he's from the Houston area, been around a long time in the self-help world. But he said one time, I remember it, and he kept saying this. I was listening to him. I sat down and went to dinner with him many times, and he would always say, when the why is big enough, the hows will take care of themselves. Then Simon Sinek wrote a book in 2000, I don't know, 16, 17, 18, somewhere in there, is start with why. Well, what we know is that why draws on the neurology that will create the how. And when you're so aligned with your why, you will create the how. The hows will figure themselves out. Now, you have to take action, but the other reason why, but the why is critical. The other reason why there, Spencer, is because the why allows you to have a level of confidence and conviction, what I call certainty. When somebody say a mom is asking, well, why would my child need care? Why would my, and a lot of times that didn't even come up, because you're already exuding the confidence, and more importantly, the education that will allow them, or the leadership that will allow them to know why. Why does my family need to be under care? Why? These aren't even questions that come up when I was growing, and those weren't even questions. It was more of, because when you understand the why, then you would always address the why. So in a report finding, say example, well, there's certain questions they have. Why don't you take insurance? Why do you see kids? Why does this place look like a, daycare at 5 o'clock at night? Why? And so when I have my why, then I address that before it even comes up as an objection, let alone an idea in their mind. So there's a lot of reasons. Some just are very deep kind of, inside. The other ones are very practical to what's going to come out of you so that you can address elephants in the room over and over again before they even come as an obstacle.
Nice. That's super good. And going back, I would love to go a little bit deeper into the neurology of those expectations. That's really been something I've been really focusing on is, I reached my goal, or what I had set for our first year in practice was 100 a week. And I've reached that in the first 7 months. And so we've almost plateaued because I've reached this vision. And now I'm like, oh, I didn't have anything next. And so my expectations have been met. Can you go through that, breaking down the neurology of expectations and just how important it is to consistently set expectations for yourself?
Well, let me first off go back to let me just prove how it's 100% truth. I'm not, this isn't something that I made up or, I've experienced it, but even that won't give it the justice that it needs. So May 6, 1954, prior to May 6, 1954, running a sub 4 minute mile was not only said to be impossible, but dangerous. I mean, they had, dogs chasing after, humans to try to break this mile. Doctor said impossible and dangerous. And then in 1954, May 6th, Roger Bannister breaks that record. But what was fascinating wasn't that. It was that in 45 days later, somebody else broke it. And within 3 years, 16 people broke it. And now high school athletes today break it. So the question you have to ask yourself is, did the biology change? Did the muscle change? Did the joints change? Just, endurance change, lungs change, right? Clearly the answer. And so this changed. And so if you look at some of the research, I mean, I could go to aging, just so much fascination, but I'll give you 2 studies. One is they did a study on maids and in a hotel and the housekeepers, and they sat down both groups, 2 groups of housemakers or housekeepers, and they explained the benefits of exercise. But with group 2, they told that what you do every day is a form of exercise. So everybody knew that exercise can lower your blood pressure, lower your body fat, lower your body weight. But group 2 was shown and explained that hanging towels, pushing carts down the hall, scrubbing toilets, scrubbing tubs is a form of exercise. And at the end of 8 weeks, they took a measurement of both groups. And group 2 and only group 2 lost weight, lost blood pressure or lower blood pressure, and lost body fat percentage. But they didn't change anything else in their life. They didn't actually change any in life. They didn't have any, nutrition or other exercise regimes that they started. So it begs the question. You can just look this stuff up. Another one was, they milkshakes. So this is, again, biology. So they took 2 groups of people. They gave them a milkshake. Group 1, they explained how this is like the perfect ratio of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates, and it will be satisfying for you. Not just for how you taste, but literally how your body is nutriently, the density of the nutrients. Group 2, they said it's really just a calorie, it's just calories. It tastes good though. It's not going to satisfy you. It's pretty, empty calories, but it tastes good. And then what they did is they actually pulled ghrelin levels. They measured, they pulled out ghrelin levels through the blood, and they measured ghrelin levels with an indication of satisfaction. And group 1 and only group 1 had higher levels of satisfaction, literally biology, as if somebody took a syringe and put it into, so what's the takeaway here? What's the takeaway? Is that your level of expectation will deliver a result. And this is what we know, science proves this over and over and again. And so I would say that to you, Zach, is here's what, if I were to coach you, I would say this, I would say, there's 2 things you need to do. Is number 1 is you got to go see somebody that's seeing twice the amount of people you are. You got to go see it, go watch it. I don't care if it's for an hour or for a shift. You got to go see it, because it will allow you to have new synapses in your brain to see, that's not that hard. Actually, I see that. I can see it. Because what you have to understand too is your brain doesn't know the difference between something you visualize and something you actually do. something you observe in your mind, and something you actually observe in real life. It doesn't know the difference. So when you can observe it, you actually can help create it, but you can actually even visualize it. But I'm going to tell you, a shortcut is to actually go observe it. Somebody's saying twice about, goes observe it. Second thing is you got to get around people who are doing 2, 3, 4, 5x more than you, because then you get to see these people are no different than me. And so what it does is it creates a neurology in your brain that says, if they can do it, I can do it. In fact, I can see how I'm uniquely gifted, maybe even differently than them. I have a different skill set. I have a different level of empathy. I have a different level of communication. So immediately your brain then starts to recruit all the action steps, all the hows to pull off that thing that you would seemingly think is like. I hang out with I'm a part of this mastermind that I've been a part of, paid to get to be part of, paid a lot of money, and I see these people that are making. I mean, I go and meet them. I hang out with them $1 million days. One guy did a $5 million day. I'm not talking month. I'm not talking week. I'm not talking year. A $5 million day he had. And I'm around this guy and I'm like, man, there's no different. Even what he's selling is just, I mean, he's like in the financial space, but he's not like nothing crazy. And you're like, wow, if he could do it. I mean, there's, this. So we've got to get our brain to be wired to what's possible. So I know it's a long-winded way of saying get around.
Yeah.
The right things and get in the right environment. They say this, and I've said this, environment eats strategy for breakfast. Environment will eat strategy. You could have the greatest strategy in the world, but if you don't have an environment around you that allows your brain to cultivate, you're going to be in trouble.
That's great. I really like that environment beat strategy. And I'm getting on a plane Thursday night to head to Boise, Idaho. I don't know if you know Ryan Ryder from the UK, but he's hosting the mastermind, and it was basically that same idea. Like, I need to get around these guys that are seeing 800, 1,000 patients a week, because I have now reached the vision in my head that I thought was going to take 2, 3, 4 years to accomplish. And so that was just self-validation for myself to hear. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. It's good.
Okay. And so like with all of this environment, right, comes a depth of knowledge and a depth of expertise and a depth of experience, right? And so when you, like you said, like when you see it, you can say like it's undeniably true. And so I know that you have studied a lot of like the neurology behind like how chiropractic like impacts people. And I feel like one of the biggest things in school, like you were saying, like you had the debate with the professor, like one of the biggest things is that we always are trying to be knocked down and saying like, oh, well, what you do is only neck and back pain. What you do is only neck and back pain. And in your last video, you said, I can explain, like, let me explain in 3 minutes, like the neurology behind chiropractic. Are you able to give us a brief synopsis on like how undeniably impactful chiropractic is on people's lives? Like based through the neurology, like to help like fuel like this passion and this conviction, like for students to actually go out and believe like what we do is so impactful.
Yeah, I could do it in 60 seconds. So the bottom line is like chiropractic, if you got rid of, like if all chiropractic was gone tomorrow, does the physiology that drives the biology in the body, does that still exist, right? And I know it's a dumb question, but I always ask chiros this. I'm like, okay, so if everything goes, if no one's ever adjusted, is there a level of physiology within the body that is still going to be occurring, regardless of whether a chiropractic was a vehicle or not, right? And the answer is yeah. So what we do is we have to look at, okay, I did a talk, this was in 2016, I think, at a research center in Omaha, Nebraska. So University of Nebraska, Omaha, they have this big research center. It was like a top heart doctor called Irving Zucker. He was the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Cardiology at the time. I don't know if he still is. Like, dude's sharp, forgot more than I'll ever know about physiology. And so again, like, I when it was able to give him and all his, med students and all the PhDs talk on chiropractic. But I didn't label it chiropractic. I said the neurophysiology of the human spine. And I explained that the spine is an intimate relationship with the brain. And this is undeniable, that there's an intimate relationship that the spine has with the brain. The spine is mobile and there's joints, and in these joints, it's loaded with mechanoreceptors. And these mechanoreceptors are influencing the brain on a minute by minute, second by second basis, millisecond by millisecond basis to tell our brains exactly what the needs are. So when a joint is not moving or aligned appropriately, that joint mechanoreceptive input into the brain is what we call now it's aberrant afferent input. It's not abnormal, it's aberrant. So Aberrant means it's altered, but it's altered and it creates that stress signal. It's like when an arm is broken, it's that signals are altered. Is it abnormal signals to the brain? No, it's not abnormal. Like, the brain is saying shut down. It's going to have all this, inflammation and splinting, and, healing immediately starts to happen, but there's pain signals. So like, those are normal. They're for a healthy body, but they're aberrant, right? And so this aberrant afferent input into the brain is what we call the disafferentation model, which, by the way, I did my thesis on for my philosophy diploma program. So that aberrant afferent input goes to the brain and it starts to hit the HPA axis, hypothalamus, the pituitary, and then it starts to kick out more stress hormones. Those stress hormones then go throughout the entire bloodstream. This is what can lead to chronic disease physiology. Pick your poison, right? Hearts, lungs, digestion, immunity. Like, I had a gal, Jen was her name. I talk about her often. She came in, she was married for 10 years, and her and her husband wanted a huge family, and they've been trying to get pregnant for 10 years and they could not get pregnant. And she had spent $80,000 on fertility treatments to no avail, like to no hope. And so she came in, she had 2 adopted children. So they'd already, Jaden and Giovanna, great family. And been to chiropractors, been to homeopaths, been to all these other people. But she comes in and within 3 months, she's pregnant. And now I think she's had 5, she has 3 kids, 5 kids now, because we moved from there. I sold that practice. But my point is, can I explain the neurology behind how that can happen? Absolutely. Right. So this norepinephrine, you start to study PJ Fitzgerald, 2010, like there's just the dots you can connect. And that's the thing that I needed to know. Like, what is really going on? Am I really unpinching a pinched nerve? And if I'm doing that, how do I do that for a 2-year-old that has an ear infection? That's not unpinching a pinched nerve. Something else is at stake here, because I'm not pinching. There's not pinched nerves. And when we start to communicate that way, a mom walks out like, oh, I can see how I've got sciatica, but I don't see why my 8-year-old needs to get adjusted. She doesn't have any back pain, so that's where we have to understand it so we can communicate it effectively and ultimately have the test and objective findings and criteria for why we're doing what we're doing and why they need care.
Right. So awesome. So what you're saying is that your level of knowledge and experience around a subject drives your expectation, like, to kind of bring everything full circle, right? Do you feel like it's possible for people to get as potent or consistent results without the knowledge of what's going on?
I think my experience would say that those that are philosophical chiropractors, so what supersedes the science, and sometimes I'm envious of those that, like, I don't need the science. Like, do I need to understand the science of an automobile to bask in its glory? Right now, somebody would say, well, if it broke, you would need to understand a little bit of that to fix it. Do I need to be a chemical engineer to understand, an electrical engineer to understand how to turn on a light? No, just go flip the light, right? So there's elements, but for me, some philosophical chiropractors. Now, I will say, and this gets down kind of a controversial subject, but even creating a new expectation, when we teach them the big idea, it allows them to. There's no doubt I got the science to back this up. Why do musculoskeletal kind of motion? I shouldn't call it motion palpation, but more of that type is going to be some more musculoskeletal type. But are they seeing results from hearts, lungs, digestion, these things? And I would say no. And part of it is the actual physical adjustment. The other part is, are they creating a healing environment? And is there a healing principle? There's healing principles at stake. And so to answer your question, the more somebody is versed, the more confidence they're going to have. And that confidence somebody's going to hand over their baby to you and be open and desiring for you to adjust them if you're confident about what you do. So, yeah.
Yeah, I asked that because I saw that you recently have been exposed or involved with Dr. Pete and the Zone School. And that's what I studied all throughout chiropractic school was Zone. I listened to all of Dr. Fleet's original audios. And I was moving through school, I was the Zone guy. And it came to the point where basically in practice, I was hitting a roadblock because I didn't have enough information to fuel a suggestion. I didn't have the confidence. I didn't have the expectation of those things because I wasn't exposed to them. I didn't understand oh man, I had to expand my awareness and expand my expectation and to say okay, these things are possible before I could actually deliver a good suggestion.
So what's your question? I mean,
I'm agreeing with you.
Let me ask you this, Spencer. What made sense for you regarding zone school?
What made sense is that understanding that like the access to the body is only really limited, basically like what is possible is only limited in what we think is possible. When we go back to our why and why I think it's like so important and why I get so charged up about helping people like find their passion and find their why, and why I think it's super important is because my mom was in a car wreck when she was paralyzed, and she was told that she was never going to walk again. And 40 different medical providers, PT, OT, DO, MD, everybody said like, well, you might as well get used to the wheelchair because that's where you're going to be. And my mom said like, I just will not take that for an answer. And this one physical therapist said like, well, I mean, I don't think it's impossible. There's definitely a way to do that. And so a year later, she walked faster than anything else, like literally defied the odds. And so what really hit for me in zone is, and why I thought it was so important, is because all it is about like empowering people to understand that the power is within their body, and that the vehicle in which we need to access that is already within. And it's like just our job as the chiropractor to make that known.
So thank you for that. That is a very good assessment. Yeah, let me, I knew I was going to get into this a little bit, but for surely before we got off this call, but I'll get into it now, is I do believe that anybody who's not taken zone school should actually really go through Dr. Pete's work and Thurman Fleet's work in zone school, because here's what happened for me. You know, I told you I grew a big practice, 1,000 a week in 4 years. And I was very strong in my philosophy. I was very strong in my science. I got debate in it with a medical doctor, this Russian medical doctor. It's a long story I won't even tell you about, but this Russian medical doctor out in Colorado at this ranch. And when I was a student, I was like a 9th trimester student. And we went to town on this guy, and I was the one they were like, so I've always had an affinity for the science. I had just read through Chestnut's book, his first book, The 14 Foundational Premises. And I remember like going toe to toe with this MD. And I'm like, yeah, because he didn't believe that chiropractic could affect the heart. I'm like, dude, you're off your rocker. Have you heard of mechanoreceptors before? Do you know what proprioception is? And anyway, he had muscle spindles, and he's like, I knew he hadn't, but it hit me of like, okay, that I realized that the world doesn't know that. And so, but then when I got to practice, I knew that Tuesday, Thursday nights were my group doctor reports. I knew in my heart of hearts, eventually after about 3 or 4 years, I realized like some of the greatest results occur because people come to my dinners, then they come to my doctor reports, and then they come to my advanced workshops where I teach them that the greatest healers on the inside. And then I've got a great catalyst. See, the brain, what I studied, the brain requires a catalyst. The brain requires a catalyst to actually, to your point, your mom was told by 40 people, but then she hold out hope, and she was this other whoever gentleman or this other doctor or practitioner was used as a catalyst to say, your body is capable. And so it's like Dr. Pete talks about, right? It's like, well, are we a little bit, I believe we're a little bit short-sighted to think, well, upper cervical guys, he's just going to hit here. SOT's guy's going to hit elsewhere. CBP's guy to get elsewhere. The other Gonza guys get it, like, and they all get results that would seemingly be pretty similar, right? And then we can't, confuse ourselves or maybe lie to ourselves and think that, okay, a homeopath over here and an acupuncture over here and Ayurvedic healer over here and Christian Scientist sits someone down and says God's in every cell in your body. So there's something else at work, right? And Pete does a good job of going through the trap door and understanding the subconscious and really diving into what is really at stake here, what's really at play. And so I'm telling you this as a guy that like, I like this, I love the science. And I could go toe to toe with anybody right now on that concept of concept therapy. But at the same time, and this is what I talked about earlier, expectation effect and concept, or even in success. What I will say is I have to bounce that off my worldview. And my worldview as a Christian is that do I, one, believe that God created us with, does the principles of this belief in concept therapy and suggestive therapy, does it add up to how we are created? Just like I had to figure out why if God made the body so intelligently, why would he make it that a spine would need to be adjusted, right? It's a whole, limitation of matter. And like you go through those questions, these are deep philosophical questions as to why. That's what, back to your question, Spencer, earlier, was why. So when I read my Bible, it says in Romans 10:9, if you believe in your heart, confess with your tongue that Jesus is Savior, you will get eternal life. John, 1 John 5, similar. Like belief then, he didn't say go dip your toes in water on Sunday or just eat bread on Monday or cut your arm and go drip some in the Sea of Galilee. He said, when you believe in your heart. Now, why is this important? For me to know that there's a principle at stake that if belief can get me eternal life, then it wouldn't be weird to think that belief actually get me health. Belief could get me a higher level of success. Belief could get, you see? So just like I had understood the philosophy of chiropractic and how the body is programmed for health, it wasn't weak and defective and bound to break down. But on that side, when you have a medicalization of society, a book was written in 2007, the more a society considers itself to be sick, the sicker it actually is. When you look at pregnancy and mom was told, like, essentially you're diseased. And I'm not saying they say that, but I'm saying they inherently mean that is like, hey, every test, to make. So do you see where we start off? And so then that belief that we can establish is so critical. Do you see how it could actually lead to the self-fulfilling prophecy in a negative way right? So you guys get that, but that's what I'm saying. We as chiropractors, you can pull people out of that. Like you can rip people out of that hopelessness, and you get to, not because the glory's on you and not because the glory's in the adjustment, because the greatest doctor's on the inside. And we could focus them on that. When they do, then the greatest healer then is one that seeks to remove interference and to create a new level of hope and belief pathways in the conscious and the subconscious, so that body can express its natural state, which is health.
Yeah, that's
awesome.
Could go a bunch of different ways there. As two believers, I think we both got fired up, and I know Romans 10:9 is going to be ingrained in my memorization for a long time. But one thing, I've picked up from following you for a bit, but also just in these last 20, 30 minutes we've been talking, is you're a phenomenal storyteller. I know that's something you're very passionate about. And so how do you go best about taking someone, and I'm assuming, from storytelling, you're probably a Donald Miller fan and kind of being that Sherpa up the mountain type stuff. But how do you best go about someone that has lost hope? Maybe it's someone unlike Spencer's mom who didn't have that symbol of, or that sense that, oh, wait, there's something different, right? Or there's a chance that I can walk again. How do you take someone that's been told from 30, 40 different doctors, and now they've come into you, and how do you walk them up that mountain and really show them that hope when they have every disbelief in their body?
Well, so I teach this pretty, kind of deeply so the first thing is, what we know to be true is that when you empathize with somebody, right, that your people don't buy because they understand everything. They buy because they feel understood. So the first key, and by the way, I'm not a great, I appreciate your that observation. But I want to make sure, I want to give some people some hope who feels like I would have never in a million years considered myself a good storyteller, or that it was even valuable. And I remember at that same ranch I was at that one time, I thought that I could, I heard from this one doctor, he was like, I just lay out all the facts and data and science and research. I'm like, that's exactly what I want to do in my report, because I'm like, that's not debatable, Well, I'm glad I got my training that I did, and I spent a lot of money. Like when I came out of school, I went $323,000 in debt post grad, like that's not including my chiropractic, debt, to get the training and expertise and skills and coaching people's coaching expenses. I'm like, well, based on what? A poor person asks, how much does it cost? A wealthy person asks, how much is it worth? Mm-hmm. Right? How much is it worth? And so what can it make you? You talk about the capacity to make money. I know this debate in chiropractic was, education so much. I'm like, I went $523,000 in debt before I made $1. But, when I say on the back end of that, was a lot of work. The first 3 or 4 years was a lot of work, but I put all that back in 4 years. So I'm just saying, so it depends on what, right? How do you gauge it? So I would have never thought I was a good storyteller. I would have never thought that storytelling, I'm like, that's for the people this is artsy people. I don't do that. I'm science, right? But if you understand the science of the brain actually is wired this way. We take in 5 senses. You guys know that, 5 senses. And by the time that information reaches the conscious brain, we have already turned that into a story. That's the way the human being makes sense of the world. So if you can just bypass the middleman and you create a story for them to get them to, so this is where in a report of findings, I go through all my clients. Number one is you got to have a signature story. That's your story. So how would I relate with this, long-winded way, Zach, to answer that question? First off, to say, I understand. I 100% understand. You've been this, the odds are stacked against you, but here's what I know, right? And then I talk about success stories. I talk about the science story. What's the science story? Well, I need to give you I need to give your brain a reason why what we do is backed by evidence that's going to support why you can get well. Like, so there's a science part of that story, very brief, but it's a science part of the story. And then success stories. The success stories are, people just like you, but I talk about the comparison effect. Most people think bad backs, bad necks, chiropractic. They think small problem, I go to chiropractor, big problem, I go to the hospital. So we have to flip the script on that. If you want to be a better converter, you want to convert people into cash, then you've got to give them, I always go through 4 simple stories. Number one is your signature story, because that relates with you. They know who you are. People, when they can know why you do what you do, they literally, it connects neurons for them that makes sense of why you're asking for a certain amount of money. They're not thinking, oh, you're just trying to get money out of me. They're thinking, oh, you've got a big why. So that's why signature story is so critical. Second thing is stake story. What's the stakes of not doing what we do? Like, what's the stakes of, well, they go down the medical model, and you know how that turns out. Then the third is the science story. It's just a simple connection of how the brain is wired and the spine is connected, just what we already talked about. And then the fourth is these testimonies, these success stories. And that's where the magic is, because I can get somebody to immediately upgrade their value, even though they've been to 13 other chiropractors, to immediately upgrade the value in my office because of what I'm putting in front of them. That's on us. That's not theirs. They're left to their own devices. They're only going to think what we allow them to think. And so that's why story is so critical, is because it's how the brain thinks. Literally story, like we are wired for story. Human brain is wired for story.
Yeah. That's really good.
And I wrote about it. I just pulled this out of my bag because I realized that I wrote about it in this book right here, The Trust Formula, because I wanted to, again, back up what I was saying. There's something called oxytocin. That's the bonding hormone. It's the breastfeeding hormone, but it's the bonding hormone. It's also, you can elicit oxytocin through a good story. And when you do that, they are 6,700 more. The research shows they were 6,700% more likely to not only pay you, but pay more for you when you can elicit oxytocin. And then they'll remember your message 19 times more. That was Princeton University study. So all of these are very practical in growing a practice and growing a movement and getting somebody to understand, hey, this guy, this gal, like, this is legit. That makes sense to me. And I need to do this.
Yeah, I think I was listening to Minardi, and it triggered that same response, and kind of just the neurology. And I don't have this 100% memorized, but I believe it was, you first have to bypass the amygdala to then get to the cerebellum to then get to the prefrontal cortex to elicit that type of rational and decision-making just based off neurology, making sure they feel safe, and then making sure it makes sense, and then eliciting that emotion. So it was really cool to kind of hear both y'all's takes on that. So. Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. I mean, it's great. There's a lot of science. The more I've grown, the more I've realized, I could, like I said, you could know all the science in the world, but not know how to do it. Want to know how to do it well. I walk into a room, I don't need to know how it's wired. I just need to know how to flip the switch and where it's at. So I could teach somebody how, regardless of whether they know any of the science, like how to flip the switch in somebody's brain. But yeah, here it is. You got to let down the amygdala. That stress response has to be let down, and you can flip somebody. And a lot of this also, Jesus did 2 things. He told, you think 73% of the Bible is story, by the way. And if God himself kind of created it this way, then he would have done it that way. Well, it turns out if you study the work of Jesus, who became man, like, he did 2 things. He asked questions, he told parables. So he'd use story and he told questions. And so, in fact, I'm doing a call with my inner circle here in an hour. And today I'm going to talk about this thing called the focusing illusion. And you can get, like, they did a study where they asked, you can get someone, when you ask a right question on day 1, you can get to a result. And the same thing on a day 2, our report of findings. So I go through 3 specific questions to get them wired to think about the value of what they're about to choose yes or no to. And it's like very ethical, and I feel great about it. And the words come out. So examples, they did a study. They said, they took these college kids and they said, are you happy? Right? Like on a big scale, are you happy? And with your life. And the second question was, like, how many dates have you been on in the last, year? So the happiness factor was like very high, most college kids and most like, but when they literally flipped those questions around and they asked them first, how many dates have you been on? And then they asked them, are you happy? The happiness factor dropped off the shelf because then all they did is they literally got the brain. It's a focusing illusion. It's like magic. And I'm not saying it's like magic, but magic, what is magic? Magic is getting you to focus on something else while something else is happening and it appears to be magic, right? It appears like that thing's going on. Well, you could do the same thing. This is the ninja communication. It's like, now you could feel great about it because you're like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how healthy do you feel today? Or in 5 years from now, do you think that you'll be healthier today than you are 5 years ago? You start to get them to think about those things. Well, if I'm going to be healthier, if I'm like, well, if the answer is yes to that question, well, then I'm going to do something about that. And then when I proposed a care plan of something that I could be doing with my health. So it's these questions that we really baked into to communication that allows somebody to really, charge money and get paid for it and deliver an amazing result, and everybody wins.
That's good. That's gold. That's gold. I'll be stealing that.
And so, sure. Like with those questions, are you asking like the same question every time, or like in the same setting, or are you like asking this question like, oh, if I feel it's appropriate, and like, is it like a question kind of based off of something else?
I teach frameworks. What I have found is frameworks is the key. So when you have a framework, it's not like an exact script. So you're asking the same thing over and over again, or because some of you can bypass a lot of questions. Because if you get an answer, a lot of times an answer can bypass, I give you an example. So Urban Meyer, football coach, he was analyst. What's that?
Oh yeah, we know about Urban.
Yeah. So Urban was asked, my buddy Josh Axe and I go back and forth. At least we're in the same conference. He's an Ohio State guy. And I'm like, well, we love
we have an Ohio State guy in our circle. So we feel your pain there.
Yeah. I mean, I can appreciate the conference, and I'll take Ohio State any day over Alabama. But so they asked Urban Meyer one time. They said, it was on Fox, I think, whoever team, I don't even remember what the team was, but it was a good example. He said, okay, you're down by 20. Coach, what are you telling them in the locker room? And he said, I'm going to pick out the 3 plays that they did to almost perfection, and I'm going to remind them. And when they string some of those together, just like they did that, they're that close. They're that close. And so then they flip the scripts. Okay, now you're up 20. He goes, I'm going to pick the 3 plays that they really let down, and it was a lack of basics, and I'm going to make sure that they don't get complacent. And if that happens continually, they're going to be in trouble, even though they're up 20. And I see the same. That's communication 101. It's the human spirit. It's behavioral science. Nick Saban, as much as I don't love SEC, I love his mentality, blocking and tackling. If you focus on the basics, guess what? The big picture take care of itself. So to your question there, So Spencer, I would say that there's a framework, and when where you're trying to go and the destination, you know how to get there, and it doesn't have to be, hey, say this every time. It's like, hey, if they answer, like, you get some people come in like, I always ask questions, right? So it's like you're showing them, you have to have objective findings. You've got to have criteria. And once that criteria, it's not about telling them what's wrong. You be able to teach is to draw in, to educate is to draw out, right? To teach is to put into them. But if you draw out of them, now they're part of the education process. And so ask them the question and say, hey, what's going to happen to you if nothing's done? And they say, it's already happened. I mean, I'm like I'm on a one-way ticket to, disability or death, early death, right? Like, I know they get it. And so then I don't have to spend a lot of time. So that's where you have this framework to know where they're going and did I do a good job educating them so that we're on the same page.
And so, I mean, one thing I think that this posed in my head, but would you say for someone, in our vitalistic subluxation focus, there's not a lot of people that are focused on sports. And so I feel like there's someone listening out there that's like, I want to be subluxation specific. I want to be adjustment specific, but I also want to work with athletes. So how did you go from this 1,000 patient visits a week, family wellness office to then being on the 2012 Olympic team working with the wrestling
Yeah, well, it's kind of a little bit of oh, it's not really long story. Honestly, in 2006, 7, and 8, I was the team chiropractor for the Nebraska volleyball team. Now I had to be underneath a different title, a biomechanical specialist, because they have a team chiropractor. Guess what happens with the team chiropractor? It goes, MD, it goes like orthopedist, MD or MD orthopedist. Then it's down to like the PT, then massage therapy, and then the chiro is like the bottom of the rung. So it's like, I'm not, like that. We know how that. So I ended up taking care of, I'll never forget. So Rachel Schwartz was her name. She was an amazing, she was a great setter. And then, no, libero is what she was. But so her family got under care, and her entire family. And then she was like the last one to start care, because I educated them, say families. And she's like, yeah, we need to get, finally got her in, start taking care of her. It was off season. She gets to the end of the summer, and Coach John Cook came up to her and said, like, Rachel, what are you doing? Like, you're changing. Like, are you doing? And she goes, the only thing I'm doing different, I'm obviously training like everybody else. But I did start this chiropractic care. And he's like, really? He goes, my daughter needs chiropractic care. So his daughter, Lauren, starts under care. And then, his wife, Wendy, and then John referred in Jolene, who's now still the trainer to this day there. And then, the assistant coach, another assistant coach. And so, and then he's like, I need to get you on my team. I need to get you taking care of them. And so so what I will say, and then the Olympic thing was another kind of similar thing. I was in 2010, Istanbul was 11, Moscow was 2010, and then London 12. But the reason, here's what I'll say as a word of advice to somebody who wants to, working with athletes is tough if you don't do it on your terms, because athletes are a lot of time prima donnas. So if you go to be the athlete, I want to tell you the best way to be the best, the best is to preach the big idea and be excellent at your technique. That's the best way. And so some of it has to be right time, right place. Some of it has to be just being able to put yourself out there. But to me, it's definitely not trying to just rub down every muscle and stretch everything and have every sort of, gimmick and thing in the book. Like that would have not gotten me, because I would have looked like everybody else. No, I was preaching and teaching and passionate, and this is boom, boom, or moving interference and this technique, and this is what we do, and this is how we're different. That's what got me on and then with Rachel, proof was in the pudding, so that's my advice. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying that to me, because I work with some athletes that think that, then they're going to try to tell you what to do. I'm like, listen, prisoners don't run the prison here. This just ain't going to work out. This is what I do. So
I'm assuming you work with Jordan Burroughs, just out of pure curiosity.
Yeah. Jordan's a great chiropractic
That's
patient.
Super cool.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
Yeah. So I kind of have something that I really would like to hear from you kind of as we start to wrap up. But what I've pretty much observed in our whole time together today is every time we ask you a question, you end it with you just come back with a story. And I feel like I'm somebody who naturally I just tell stories because we're from the South, and you just kind of share things. But for some people, a lot of times when I share my why with them, they'll say oh, well, I don't have a story like that, or I don't have a story. If you're this is what I hear a lot. If you're somebody who doesn't have a story like Spencer's, right, or Spencer's mom's story, you find something for yourself. But we all really have a story, and we all have something that's deeply meaningful to us. It's just sometimes hard, I feel for people to get that across. And so I would love to give our listeners a takeaway. What to you, I know your book is about it, but what is the basic framework of a good, effective story?
Okay. So those of you out there who are taking notes, I create a formula, and the formula it's called the impact story formula. And the first step, there's only 4 steps. First step is your upbringing, right? So explaining how you're, and let me take a step back before I even go through the story. The first thing you got to put yourself into is you put yourself in the mind and the shoes of your listener. Who is your audience? Because the story is not about you. That's the one thing we have to recognize. It's about them. And so there's different parts of the story that I'm going to go over right now. But if you don't take the framework of this is about them and seeing everything through their eyes. See, I can tell a story. And I work with a lot of clients on this, and they'll be telling me your story. And then I go through their story. I'm like, you're so many points that you could have emphasized for them, on them, about them. Remember, it's about them, but you just made it to be about you. That's not the point of the story. So first step, upbringing. right? Upbringing, mothers, fathers, teachers, preachers. You were brought up in a way that was very relational to the person you're talking to. And when they share that same level of relation, there's empathy built. Second thing is you had a test. At some point, you had a test in your life. You're going to explain that test. The third thing is you're going to have you have a search. You search for an answer to that test. Now, I'm going to take up on this search component. There's two major factors that must be talked about, or at least must be emphasized. One is in that search, you had a lot of doubt or skepticism that you were ever going to overcome it. And then the other piece is you had emotion around it. And then you had an epiphany. Like there was an epiphany. So you had an emotion, you had doubt and skepticism, and then you had an epiphany. You had something that occurred that gave you this, wow, this search, the epiphany that then led to the fourth component, which is the, your solution. So you got upbringing, test, search, triumph. Okay. The solution is what I call the triumph. You have a triumph. Now, Spencer, what's your mom's name?
My mom's name is Melanie.
Melanie. So I'm not going to get the story right because I know for time purposes, but I'm going to say Melanie's story based on the little you've told me here, but I'm going to use it how I would potentially use it. Again, I'm going to butcher a lot of the things, but I'm going to make a point across. So what again, give me the brief thing too. What happened that led to the
yeah. So they hydroplaned. My mom went underneath the seatbelt and ejected out of the windshield. She was like care flighted to the hospital where they put full spine Harrington rods from T1 to L5. That's my first memory is seeing her in the like post-op room. I was 2. And then I remember, from what I remember since I was so young, is my mom was going to PT every single day, and I would sit across in the Sonic, and I thought I was going to be there pretty much my entire life. And then later on, my mom, she started walking, and she actually walked down the aisle to marry my stepdad, who was driving in the accident. And they've been together 22 years now.
How old were you when the accident?
I was 2 or 3.
And you remember being in the Sonic at that age, 3, 4, 5 years old, somewhere around?
No, my first memory is I was wearing a cowboy hat and my grandma was carrying me into the post-op room. That's my first memory.
That as a 2-year-old?
Yeah, like 2 or 3.
And then how long does it from 2 to when she actually like recovered or was able to recover?
I think like 18 months later.
18 months. And who was who was the doctor or the?
I have no idea.
So somebody had looked at her and said, hey, you can be well. Somebody did that allowed her to. Okay. So again, I'm going to butcher this, but I'm going to give you an example of like how I would potentially use that. Right. So it's like, so Melanie, how old was your mom when she got in the accident?
Oh man, 24.
24. And I'm assuming your mom was kind of like grew up in the medical model, a typical kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to go to upbringing. So what makes me so passionate about what I do here? Notice I'm saying these words because I'm like, people follow passion and your why they don't follow. And you said this earlier, Spencer, it's like, they don't want to be under the care of a doctor who's just like wants their way and is doing it for their reasons. Right. Like I'm doing it because I kind of fell into this. Like I'm so passionate. We're going to find here the reason why we do education here, the reason why we do care plans, the reason why I have technique and the technology and the things that makes us different and unique than anybody else is because I'm so passionate because of something that happened in my own family. And when I was 2 years old, I vividly remember, wearing a cowboy hat. My grandma took me into the post-op room and I watched my mom suffer. And she was in almost a life-threatening car accident. And I watched every doctor. I watched my mom go to doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor, PT, rehab. I watched every doctor say, you're never going to walk again. And I was young and I'm hearing some of this after the fact, but I watched. And so I'm telling you this because that was my mom's biggest test of her life. And that was one of my biggest tests. I vividly remember thinking that this is the way it's going to be forever. And I sit here and I see this now day in and day out, people coming in saying, hey, I don't think there's any hope for me. I'm probably going to need these drugs for the rest of my life. I've been told by this doctor and that doctor. And you know who we work on people that can't be helped. That's what we see. And just like my mom couldn't be helped, I'm so passionate behind this because what happened with my mom as she was on this journey, there was one guy. How many people? One person. There was one person that told her when everybody else, dozens and dozens says you're going to be confided with. There was one person. There was one person that said, your body's capable. You are able. You're going to be able to come out of this. And that one person, has driven my mission, because that person has led me eventually led me into chiropractic college, eventually led me into understanding the principles of true health and healing. And I'm going to tell you right now that I will not stop talking, because I see where people are up against, and I see where you're up against. And what we're going to do is turn the tides on you. If somebody would have took the time to tell my mom that, I don't know where I'd be today. I got to see her walk, my, stepdad down the aisle, and like what medical model would cause a miracle is not a miracle at all. The greatest doctors inside your body. And what we do is we remove interference so that body can help can heal the way. So you see where I'm going with that. But notice I went upbringing. I'm just like you. Right. I actually didn't even mention that part, but I would have mentioned, I was the medical model like you. My mom was under the medical model just like you, right? Your story is really good, and you could really dive deep into it, and how it relates to everybody is, I was just like, it was no different, for me, like I'm going to tell you guys from my story, like I grew up, my mom's a nurse, sister's occupational therapist. Like I grew up, I didn't have one set of tubes. I had two sets of tubes in my ears. I had my tonsils taken out at 9. My brothers are medical doctors. My two oldest brothers are medical doctors. So and then I got injured pole vaulting in high school, 16 years old. And when every doctor said, you can't be helped, you can't be helped. And when one doctor, the neurologist, said, you need to be on antidepressants. And my mom got mad and said, no way, you don't know my son. And so we end up at our dentist that said, you should try a chiropractor. And lo and behold, we walked in there not knowing what was going on. And he took a full spine x-ray, showed me my pelvis plane line. And I thought to myself, there's no way the biggest industry, the biggest hospitals, the best technology, all these people that I just went, all the testing, the best of the best of the best. I've been to the best. It was a research center. I went to the hospital at the research center 2 hours from my home, like the best of the best. If they can't do it, how is this guy going to do it? Sure enough, takes an x-ray, shows me my spine, shows me my pelvis, and he starts adjusting me. And everything changed. And I'm going to tell you right now, that's what gave me, but I also never knew the full scope of benefits of chiropractic. I didn't understand the brain, the neurology. I didn't understand all the organs and how they're involved. And then my siblings got Crohn's disease. And so that's my story. I won't get into the depth of it, but like, what did I do with my story? Everybody has a story. And you may say, to your point, I don't have everybody has a story. It's a lie from the devil to think that, one, you don't have a story. Number two, people, the other things I get, clients will say, well, they don't want to hear my story. They came for theirs. I'm like, well, if they don't hear your story, they're going to make one up about you. And if they make up about you, I'll tell you what it's going to be. It's going to be somewhere around money. It's going to be somewhere around, they want to keep you coming back for the rest of your life. It's going to be somewhere around, it was all about for you and for your business and not for their benefit. So you can either allow them to make that one up that they're going to, and it's not even their fault. They're not trying to be judgmental. That's just what they do. Or you can tell them the real one. And so we all have a story. We have to tell the real one. And when you know how to tell it appropriately, and other stories too, right? Testimonies, facts. That's why I take a report of findings. I just turn it into 4 stories. I'm a science guy, but I'm like, what's the best, report of findings? 4 stories. So, yeah.
Right. What are those 4 stories in your report of findings?
Number 1 is your own signature story. Start off with that. Why? Because it lowers the guard. You said that, Zach. It lowers the guard. Minority saying that amygdala, it keeps them safe. It gets them to realize, wow, that's your big why. You're passionate about this. That's a very ethical, moral, good reason as to why. And I'm glad I'm here. You seem like an expert. So we teach our own signature story. That's first. Second thing is the stake story. What are we up against? Why are we so passionate? Because if you don't get the problem solved, guess what? You're going to have to resolve to something that you probably never thought you would do. And that is drugs and surgery and the rest. So we go through, that's brief. Science story, that's also brief. That's just the connection. Why the mechanism that we have as a chiropractor? Why is the catalyst of a chiropractic adjustment? Why does it matter? Like, why is the brain connected to the rest of the body? Like, how is the spine connected to the rest of the body? And then the fourth one, most important one, is the success stories. And that is making sure you have testimonies in there, because they're going to compare what you do based on what they hear. They have a perceived value. They can't get the actual value. So you have to create the perceived value. So the perceived value is going to come from your education. It's going to come from your ability to communicate that value. And that comes from stories. success stories.
One thing, and this is just pure curiosity, something
that's so good. I have a lot of things to upgrade.
One thing I've been considering is right now we have a poster board with 20 of our 5-star Google reviews. And it's testimonies, right, of people's experience. But one thing I have contemplated doing is putting almost a binder or booklet in our consultation room, where we do our consult as well as our report of findings, and leaving it there. And it's our within success stories. And so it goes over, it might have an initial scan with a cute like progress scans and like what's been accomplished in those, and then having like a picture of that person to make it more real. That way, when they're seeing this, the CLA scans and these objective findings that no other, definitely no medical doctor or no other chiropractor or physical therapist has ever used, they can now have an understanding, okay, this is where we're going. And so I'm curious your thoughts, if that would be something you would consider, or just stick to the 4 stories.
What's your question on that? Yeah, we stick to the 4 stories, but what's your, ask that again.
I mean, I think you answered the question, but I've been contemplating putting in a success stories booklet in our consult room. Just so
in your consult room, that, here's what I'm saying. Yes, have the success story. Like, man, they get facts. I mean, like, more stories, the better. Mm-hmm. But don't
rely on that.
Don't forget, or don't kind of fool yourself that just because you have a binder sitting out there, they're going to look to it and it's going to hit. Like, I'm very adamant that, some chiros out there will be like, well, or some consultants, some coaches, like, I just like to do a 4-minute report of findings. I'm like, that's fine. I'm just saying, for us mere mortals that don't necessarily, have laser beams coming over our eyeballs, or 26-inch, biceps, that I got to use some communication tactics. And one of them is, stories sell, and you create a level of memory, you create a level of value, and you want to get referrals in your practice. You want people to bring in their family. Like, you got to give them a reason why, and a reason why it happens through story, because that's how like we said, the brain is wired for that. And I'll also say, and I'm going to give another plug for Zone School. I don't get anything from this. I credit myself a couple of things, not a lot, but I told you I had a gift of remembering dates. The other thing that I'm like, I'm pretty, comfortable in my own skin. And when I see a level of truth and something that even disrupts some of my previous knowledge that I had before, or even to recognize some of the knowledge that I thought I had was a little bit more dogma than full truth, I'm willing to go down that path. And one of the things that Dr. Pete has enlightened me or made me aware of is where some of the results were occurring, even though I thought it was recurring from one way. And I'm saying this because it doesn't take away from anything I've taught in the past or done in the past. It actually adds to it, because now I can have full freedom to know where the results actually come from and how to get more of them reproducibly. And so I just encourage everybody that it's not even for the technique. It literally, I tell this Pete, actually his office is like 4 doors down from me. So him and I are connected in a lot of ways, but I tell him this, if he's standing here, it's not about the technique, and he would agree. It's about the principles. When you understand healing principles, it starts to, you upgrade everything. And then you can get passionate about putting it in a framework and a wheelbarrow to make sure you're reproducible. And then you build the practice of your dreams. I'm telling you right now, like, everything is this expectation. Everything is this why, this belief, this driving home what they're going to believe. I mean, even handing the zone cards that they do, Fleet always taught those zone cards. Mm-hmm. Somebody sees that, you kidding me? Like, immediately, now you have a catalyst. What did I say? The brain requires a catalyst. Your adjustment is going to be a catalyst to help them accomplish that. And when the catalyst actually has evidence and proof behind it, the science that behind, when you have this catalyst, what else? So you see how all of this wraps up together, and it's a really good place to be on this side of the coin here for us chiropractors.
That's awesome. I think we're about done. I know it's a question Spencer and I both like to ask, but one last question. If you were to give either 1 or 2 very tactical pieces of advice for either a last year chiropractic student or someone 6 months out, what would be your two biggest pieces of advice for that person?
So last piece of advice for somebody new that's right out of practice or
Yep.
school. Well, I would go back on what I said earlier. Number one, well, it was probably three. Be clear on what you want. I feel like that's a little cliche. I a little bit hesitate to say it, but you're a mom out there. You're like, I want to be a mom, and I want to have a little, kind of boutique practice, and that's great. Life's great. Like be clear on what you want. Hey, I want to be as big as I want to be a 500-week practice, and I want to collect, $2 million a year. Okay, awesome. Like, so get clear on what you want, and in order to know what you want, you kind of got to know what's going on out there. Second thing is, when you know what you want, get a mentor, get a coach, get somebody who you can either model after, or somebody who can coach you to model after, or to lay the path. Don't reinvent the wheel, as they say, right? There's a path, and people have been on that before. Once you get to a certain height, now you can kind of create your own. But don't reinvent this the past minute. And then thirdly is consistently be in rooms, right? I say this: if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. If you're the most successful person in the room, you're in the wrong room. If you're the strongest, most powerful person in the room, you're in the wrong room. You got around people who are doing bigger things, thinking bigger things, and achieving bigger things, so that you can then create a new expectation in your mind. Like I said earlier, environment is strategy for breakfast. So now you get around that. You can't help but create that. Your brain will figure out the hows when the why or the environment is congruent with that. So those are the three big things.
This was awesome. That was great. That was great,
man.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Dan, thank you so much for today. Can you let our listeners know where they can find you and where they can get plugged in with you?
Yeah, I would say you could go to therealdansullivan.com, therealdansullivan.com, not the fake, the realdansullivan.com. Or you could also find me on Instagram. That's probably the best place social media wise you could find me. I think it's Dr. Dan Sullivan, Dr.Dan_Sullivan. And you'll see my stuff there. And yeah, those are probably the two easiest places to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Dan, for being with us today. This was awesome. I know I have a bunch of notes written down that I'm going to be implementing into my practice today. And thank you to everybody who listened to our show. If you like this, please share it with somebody who you feel needs to listen. And thank you so much for listening to another episode of the What Now podcast. Peace.